We are beautifully,
Morning, everyone, and welcome to Melanated podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Karen.
Hi, I'm Sarah. So we have a guest on this week, and I will introduce him in due course. But as we are starting, let's go to the beginning. So last week we talked about whether parents should or could get involved in their children's dating lives. As you know, Sarah wasn't here. She has a very different opinion to Karen and myself. So Sarah, I'm going to hand over to you to tell us your position on whether or not you're going to get involved in Naya's dating life.
Okay, so yeah, I have quite a different perspective. So I mentioned in a previous podcast, I was in care and then I was adopted by two white couple, which are obviously now my mum and my dad, who I know as my mum and my dad. So they're very conservative. They're very kind of prim and proper white British people. And when I grew up, I didn't know any black people growing up at all. And I remember a long time ago saying to my dad, I must have been about 14 or something, saying to my dad, like, I'm not sure about dating and stuff. I'm not sure what kind of guys I would date. I don't know if I'd date a black guy because I just don't know, because I hadn't met anybody. And I remember him saying at the time, oh, that's okay. He's something like along the lines, black men can be quite aggressive. Now, when I bring this up to him, well, I haven't for a while, but when I bring it up to him generally, or I've spoken to him about it in the last, 3 or 4 years, he has always been so apologetic. Like, I was so ignorant. That's such a silly comment. I can't believe what I said. I'm embarrassed. As he's met my partners over the years and stuff, he's met other black men. I think that was the thing. He was ignorant, and he's the first to admit he was ignorant. So if he had got involved in my dating life, as per the conversation last week, it would have been a total disaster, because I know with him being kind of middle to upper class white conservative man, he'd want me to have a boyfriend like Boris Johnson, and I'd have wanted Burna Boy. So that would have gone down like a lead balloon. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
It would never, ever, ever have worked. My mum would have just backed up whatever he said. So, yeah, where I appreciate what you ladies will want to do in your daughters' lives, I believe that my daughter should have some kind of experiences of getting to know what kind of person she likes. Because for me, I was out there. I was kind of getting to know what kind of person I liked. And it's through making those mistakes with the wrong kind of people. I've never met anybody in my life that has gone out with the same, one person that's gone out with the same person from day dot and continued on and had a wonderfully successful marriage. Of course, they're out there, but it's rare. So, of course, I don't want my daughter to be with some abusive, idiot. And I will be kind involved in talking to her about maybe who she's with. But, I'm not necessarily going to dive in and say, I suggest that you be with this person, because that might not be who she wants to be with. Yeah. So I believe in a person kind of exploring and finding out who they want to be with, and not necessarily being kind of influenced so much by parents. Don't get me wrong. If there's someone that comes along that's wonderful, that I can kind of suggest to her, I'll make a suggestion, but that would be as far as it goes, So yeah, I just wanted to add that to the conversation. So thank you.
So we were saying suggest, introduce, and leave it to the young people to figure out whether or not there is no chemistry. So you don't think your dad would have picked a white man that you would have liked? You don't think that's a possibility?
It's always a possibility. So I say never. But I just know me now, and I know what I like. And I can't see him doing that. I just can't see him picking somebody. I always say everybody should go for who they want to go for. If your type is, I don't know, I can't think of ginger Scotsman, then you go for a ginger Scotsman if that's your type. I honestly think people should just go for who they like. And I know my type. And I don't think that my dad would have picked my type, Karen. I really don't believe that, he'd have made the right choice for me. But then that's about my situation, isn't it? My situation might be different than somebody else's situation. So had my dad been my biological dad, then maybe he would have made a right choice for me. Actually, come to think of it, it's interesting because I'm imagining my dad now, as with his personality, if he was a black father, actually, I think he'd have made a really good choice for me. So it's a weird thing to think of, but yeah.
Thanks for that, Sarah. Karen, did you want to come back on anything Sarah said?
I think it's really interesting, everything you just said, Sarah. And I think what Kay and I discussed at the end of the conversation was really that we would try to pick not what we would like for our children, but what we think our children would like for themselves. And that's quite tricky. And I said last week about really listening to my daughters, listening to, their interests, what meets their checklist, what things they'd be looking for. And therefore, kind of being a bit more open and seeing that for them, as opposed to, well, this is what I would like, because I'm not them. So I think it's a bit like what you're saying, right? So you're not sure that your parent would be able to pick what you would want. They'd have their own agenda.
That's right.
And I completely agree with that. And that's what, that's why I have met a couple of suitable young men, which in my mind would be suitable, but I think that they were choices based on my criteria, not my daughter's. And I haven't even bothered introducing her because I don't think they're right for her. Like I don't think she would agree. So, I'm with you on that.
All right. So, Willis, our guest for tonight, did you have any contribution to this topic? Your mic. Willis, your mic is, you're muted. That's it.
Okay. Let me jump. So this is really interesting to hear and hear the different perspectives. And I'm thinking of it as from a father's perspective now. And I'm thinking of it like, okay, so I want my children to have choices and options, but also I want to keep them safe. And there's a really, really fine balance between giving that freedom and choice and opportunity to make mistakes. But some of the mistakes can be incredibly huge.
Yes.
And it's the consequences of those, which I think, as you were speaking there, Sarah, I was thinking of how, what would it be like if I was a white male living in a particular area? My children have been to public school, had lots of opportunities, been skiing, had real caviar, not lumpfish, and so all these sorts of things. And I think I would have, depending on my exposure, my experience of the world, that is what's going to shape how free, I guess, or how many options my children would have in terms of their dating based on my experience. And I'm also then thinking about the place of the internet. And sometimes there are those situations with young people that I've worked with over the years who I'm going to call it thrill seeking. So the thought of the other is really tempting, and that then outweighs the danger of the unknown, because culturally they're just not prepared for those situations and scenarios. And I don't think that's about race necessarily. I think that may be about class, exposure to experiences and those types of things, and also gender as well. So if I've got a son, I think my conversation with my son will be very different to the conversation with my daughter. And so I think there's all these different layers and dimensions that are there for me.
I agree. I had a different conversation with my son, Willis, than to what I had with my daughter. Absolutely right.
I don't have a son, so I'm going to ask you both to elaborate on that. Why were the conversations different and how?
I'm putting my hand up. For myself, I know there's a clear gender bias. I'm a male. generally speaking, if I'm speaking heterosexual relationships, I'm thinking, okay, what is this male boy looking for with my daughter? And if I'm thinking about gay relationships, I'm then thinking about a whole range of other things. And I think it would boil down to possibly power, consent, control. If I'm thinking about, so if I'm thinking of, I guess for me, there's my work colors and shades so much of what I say and do, and how I think about young people and the vulnerabilities. And so I'm thinking about young women black young women who are, finding their culture, finding the power from within their culture. But at the same time, as within all cultures, I believe, there are individuals who are willing to exploit that and take advantage of that. So I'm really mindful, and I think there is a bias on my part towards my girl children, I believe, being more vulnerable in relationships than my boy children. And I know that's irrational. I know that it isn't right. I know that. But it's there. That I would feel so protective of a daughter, perhaps more so than a son.
Absolutely, I do. I feel much more protective of her. But Karen, at the time, if I tell you where I was coming from with my son, it was, am I going to get along with this person that he's chosen? And when he was dating outside of his race, then there was a culture clash. And a lot of the nuance of language, of the ways of being in my house, his girlfriends didn't get it. They're white British. And so my conversations were, okay, so this is the woman who potentially is going to be my daughter-in-law, who is going to be my grandchildren. How is that going to work out culturally? Do I cook for them in the way I cook? Can I cornrow their hair? Can I teach them patois? What about the mix? What will they make of a mixed heritage? And will she or he as a grandchild be able to explore both sides of the cultures safely? So these are my concerns, that if he was dating a black girl, I probably wouldn't have the conversations around who he's choosing or try so hard to steer him in a certain direction, because they understand. They know how to behave when they come to my house. The unspoken rules that gets passed down. It's all there. So you've met Tiana on this podcast, both of you ladies, and I would have said she would be my perfect daughter-in-law, because she just gets it. And I don't have to have a word, yeah. And I always thought, in my old age, I'll be fine. She'll cook for me. I won't get potatoes when I've lost my teeth. If I've lost my teeth, she will crush up yam and banana for me. So it was all of that for me. So my conversations with him around, be careful who you choose, because this is the person who is going to completely change the dynamics of her family. And I don't feel the same with my daughter, because she holds the same values that I do. So even if she dates interracially, the culture will still be there, first and foremost, for her. So, yeah. Now, we could go on about this as if it was the topic for tonight, but it's not. So thank you, everyone, for your contribution. So moving on into my little what's happened in the week segment, I'm going to keep it very brief. What a week it's been, ladies and gentlemen. We've had a new prime minister, a new government, and a new king in 1 week. And the Queen has passed. But what stuck out for me this week was the fatal shooting of Chris Cabba by the London Met Police, and the injustice of that. And even now, yesterday, when the march was going on for him, Sky News, and I was watching, reported the march and the protest against his killing as those were going to see the Queen and they were going to Buckingham Palace, and that they were marching to go to Buckingham Palace to pay their respects to the Queen. They had a megaphone. They were clearly saying, we want justice. They were calling his name. And still, The media, I don't know what's happening with them, but I was really, really angry and frustrated. Eventually, Sky did correct themselves, and they did say the march was to do with Chris's killing. But that's really stuck with me because even in such a turbulent time, racism always have to feature somewhere. So I don't know if you know the story, but Chris was driving on Monday night. ANPR picked up the number plate of the car he was in as a car that's linked to a firearms incident. They surrounded the car. They didn't check. They shot through the window and killed him on the spot. Turns out there were no firearms in the car or near the car, and he wasn't the owner of the car. And so his distraught parents, and I can just imagine the distress they're feeling, to watch them cry and ask for justice, and you almost kind of know how this is going to end. That broke my heart this week. So that's where my sadness and sorrow went this week. So that's who I want to remember or to focus on is Chris Cabot. And he was about to be a dad, and he'll never meet his child now. I don't know if you guys were aware of the news or if you had any views on it. Willis, I see you nodding.
Yes, I was aware of the news, and again, it was a reminder of how in terms of Black lives, it repeats and repeats, and the narrative doesn't go away. And it's interesting what you say about that the Sky News, the construction of a dialogue around a particular narrative, i.e., the Queen's passing, which for a nation it is important, but before that, the killing of young Black men and young Black women has been going on for a very, very long time. And it's important, I think, for us all to remember that this is that conversation and that campaigning needs to continue, even amongst the mourning of Her Majesty the Queen. That still, it isn't one or the other. They sit side by side for me.
Thanks, Willis, and for me too. They really do. And I really hold his family in prayer because that grief they're going through, it's extraordinary. So, moving on to this week's topic. We are starting a series on men's mental health, and we have a guest tonight, professional in the industry, and I cannot wait to introduce him to you. But first, ladies, I have to tell you how I met Willis. So I was a trainee counselor about to start a placement. And I wasn't at college the day that the placements went to advertise themselves. And I knew I had an interest in end of life. So I picked a certain hospice, and I made an appointment to meet with the head of therapy to discuss whether or not I could have a placement there. At no point did it cross any of my cohort's mind to tell me about Willis. So I rocked up to my interview. I think I looked pretty good too. But my shock to see the head of therapy coming down the stairs, and he is a Black man. Oh my gosh, the delight, everything in me just sang. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm coming here. Because I had not seen anyone like Willis before. In therapy, we joke it's white, it's female, it's middle class. So there developed a professional relationship, and then now a personal one. And I have so much admiration and respect for Willis and what he does professionally. Willis, I haven't got all your qualifications here. So when you introduce yourself, could you please tell our listeners what you do? I know you are an extraordinary therapist, but you have done so much in your career. So welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. And then we have some questions for you about working with men who present for help, for therapy or not, when they are distressed.
Okay. Thanks, Karen. Thank you for the introduction. I am humbled, incredibly humbled.
Well deserved.
Okay. So background is counselling, psychotherapy with children and adults in palliative care settings, hospice and hospital and community-based palliative care. Trained children's social worker, child protection, clinical supervisor, many, many, many years, which I think the shadow of our relationship extends back very far, Karen. So I'm
Really does.
27 years post-qualified as a psychotherapist. And I think in preparing for the podcast, I was thinking back to, in terms of mental health, who were the main people that were pioneering work when I was training, which was a predominantly white European course. I was out of a group of 12 on my diploma course. I was the only black male, only black person. When I did my master's degree, I was one of 2 black people out of a group of 24. Social work was slightly different, so social work is predominantly black individuals. Yeah. And then we have to think about what it is that we're doing as social workers in this climate with very limited resources, high stress levels, and it's predominantly the black workers that are doing those work there. So there's lots of issues there for me in thinking of that. So the person that I suppose influenced me quite a lot was there was a book written many, many years ago by Roland Littlewood, and the other author was Lipsedge, if I remember correctly, and it was Aliens and Alienists, and it spoke very much about black people, as in people of colour or migrants coming into the UK, and how there was such a high number of mental health issues for those individuals, and it explored and reflected on from 2 psychiatrist perspectives about the place of discrimination and how it manifests into mental health difficulties for individuals who are not the indigenous population. So I suppose that's it in a really tight nutshell. I'm sure as the questions come along, there will be other things that pop up as we go along. So I'm going to hand back.
Thanks, Willis. I just had a chuckle as you talk about how our relationship developed. I remember one supervision session, you said to me, and you probably don't remember this, I was in final year and trying to figure out my professional identity. And I remember you saying to me, Karen, they know you're black, because I was doing everything to blend and to become this Eurocentric therapist. And that really stopped me in my tracks. So talk about impact on mental health. Yes, even then as a female, my thinking was keep my hair relaxed, keep it straightened, change my accent, dress in blue, gray, and black, and just fit in and don't show my blackness. And when you reminded me of that, that's when I first shaved my head, shaved off all the relaxed hair, went natural, claimed myself. So what a nice segue into talking about men's mental health and what it is like growing up in this country and being part of a diaspora. So I'm going to ask Karen and Sarah to go ahead with their questions for you, and I'll jump back in later.
Okay, I just want to kick off with one question, Willis, that's okay. So this isn't about my practice as such, because I work with teenagers. And that's another story altogether, pretty much, when it comes to the boys I work with. Sadly, not enough young boys, more females. But how would you approach, this is talking about a young man here. Actually, I could use this in practice, actually. When it comes to a young man or an older man or a boy or whoever, a male, that has a lot of issues, blatantly is struggling with their own mental ill health, but keeps saying they're fine, and they're still struggling and actually falling to pieces in front of you. Because I think this happens a lot. I know this happens a lot. I've personally experienced that with somebody I was very close to in my own life, but I just wonder, in your professional opinion, what do you think about that, and how would you approach somebody like that, please?
Okay, so first and foremost, if someone tells me that they're fine, my first point is I hear that you believe that you're fine. As someone that cares about you, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm hearing. And male to male, black man to black man, as Karen said, we can see that you're black, and they can see that I am black. So let's not get that twisted. Let's just take it as it is. It's one black man to another. I'm hearing what you're saying, and it's. I think there's something about being really relatable. So earlier on, Karen spoke about language, and that's really important. So what we're aiming to do within our practice and our connections with young black people and people of color generally, we use our tongue, our language. We don't dress it up in the professional tones because that will get you so far. But this is what our young people are used to, and then they don't believe that. So we have to reach into us and allow us to be real with them. Yeah. So when we say, I can imagine that that's difficult. When we say it, we look them in the eye and say that. It isn't just a bunch of words that are coming out. And there's something about people of color, people who have experienced oppression will know what pain is. Will know what it is for your pain to be denied. Oh, don't be silly. It will be all right. Oh, go on, do this. No, it isn't as simple as that. So there's something about when we're talking to people, we talk from a place of honesty. And when we're talking, we're speaking from that place of, when I say that I get it, I have to look in the eye and tell you, say, I get it. You know what I mean? It's like that. So there's a whole thing about how we are physically. So our professions teach us to say things and to do things in a particular order and manner. We're a people who are a oral people. So when we speak, we're listening. So we got to speak on a level that is connectable and relatable. So we got to be real. With that comes a whole load of vulnerabilities about bringing down our barriers of all the shields that we have of our profession. Dare I be me with you? Yes, we have professional boundaries. Yes, we hold things back because it would be inappropriate to share everything. But there is a point when we say to someone, I get it, and we really, really do get it, and we're trying to share that. I guess the other element in there is about we can't deny the existence of racism and the education system and how other systems such as health and the police and other systems that were there to protect haven't always protected. So therefore, as individuals, our children will have heard the stories of people being taken away to hospital and never coming back, and it happened. So they're going to be frightened of that. That is a reality. They also know that, if they speak in a particular way, they will try and fit in to what they perceive as being the safe mode of operating. So we speak, we don't use our hands too much, we don't raise our voice, don't become animated. It's all danger, danger. So again, it's being really mindful of all of these things and letting our young people know that we see, we appreciate, we understand the precarious positions that they're in when they are seeking help. The other dimension of this, I guess, is about, for me, is about masculinity and the hyper masculinity, particularly of young black men.
Yeah.
So then when we're either super potent, and having lots of children, lots of sex everywhere, or really masculine and aggressive and violent, when actually there's some really gentle men out there, really, really gentle, really caring, really seeing it. But they have to hold the persona sometimes to keep their street cred on a particular level. And we know this with young people who are in neighborhoods where, if you show a caring side, you're labeled as X, Y, Z, and it makes you vulnerable. There's a whole load of risky, I think, factors out there for young people. I'm not sure if that answered all of your questions, Sarah, but I think that there's just so much in that one question as it was.
Definitely. No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you one more question, but I'm going to jump to Karen or Kay because I don't want to, hog all the questions. So I'll jump over to Karen or Kay.
I was just going to say thank you, Willis, for everything you've said, because so many things resonated with me. There was somebody I had a relationship with who really struggled mental health wise. I don't even know if they were aware of it really. But as time has gone on, it became apparent to me that that was what was happening for that person. And you talked about, people coming in, perhaps as a migrant to this country, and how different it is and how people can really struggle. And I think that's what happened to this person, was that culturally it was a shock. And it's very different. This person was from Jamaica, and you can imagine just the weather, climate was very different. The culture, the food, the expectations, the work, workload, kind of work-life balance. It was just so different for this person. I think they really struggled. The other thing that you mentioned was the fact that, certain, communities find it really difficult to be vulnerable because they have had to contend with adversity and all the, difficulties that comes their way. And it made me think about how important it is to have therapists of colour, because I know if I brought that person to see, perhaps a Caucasian person who was very middle class, talk the talk, I'm not saying that they're usually very qualified and very knowledgeable in their field, and very, academic and all those things. And I'm not discrediting that. However, would that really have reached this person? And my guess is not. And I think it's really important that, like you say, there are therapists who can relate. It's so important to be relatable. It's so important to kind of, meet people where they are and find that commonality. And, sometimes I've had conversations with my colleagues who happen to be white and English, and I don't know if they get it. So I work in a school, just to give you some background. I work in a school, a secondary school, and I do a lot of work with parents. So in trying to support the young people with their emotional well-being and their mental health, I do meet with a lot of parents. And when I meet with parents who are of colour, you can just see the relief on their face. Like, I think they think, thankfully, there is someone who I can relate to, because I think they're quite used to other people coming in, and with the best will in the world. I'm not suggesting that that they are not coming from a good place. However, their take on things are going to be different. I had a training session. It was a safeguarding training session recently, and a lady sat there and she was saying, some of these people say, it's their culture to physically chastise. And, she kind of rolled her eyes. And I said, well, actually, for some of these people, it really is. It really is part of, and I'm not suggesting that it's right or that we should encourage it. However, what I'm suggesting is that it is, for some people, part of their culture, and it has worked for them in terms of what they think is effective parenting. And so if we want to change that, we have to offer them alternatives, and we have to say, okay, I hear where you're coming from. However, perhaps you can try this, instead of calling social services at the first instance. And those things, are really, really important to me. So, yeah, I was just listening to everything you said, and, I could relate to so many different things there.
And so there's a lot. There's a lot in there. Okay, so my first thoughts are about how my thought was about what is it like to live two lives, two different ways of being in one life, if that makes sense. So you've got someone who experiences emotions in one language, patois, yeah? They experience an emotion in that language. They then want to express that to someone else. Do they use the patois and then have to go into dissecting that down and translating it literally? Or do they just speak the patois and be themselves? More than likely, they have to speak the patois and then translate it. So again, if we think about mental health, there's all these things, there's this whole range of things I believe that happen where individuals have a range of experience and emotions. They want to share them, but they're translating it. Yes, it's English, but actually the feeling behind it can be so much deeper than what it is presented in your British English, if that makes sense. There's also something about how I was thinking of, you were talking about the situation you were in and the body language of colleagues, etc. We mustn't forget Victoria Clembier. And in her report, that safeguarding report, it was all about she was left in that situation because the local or the authorities viewed it as cultural practice.
Right.
Yeah. And so that, look how long ago that was, and that narrative is still continuing now. And as you're saying, what you're talking about is having relationships with individuals, with parents, to support them to parent in a country that has different rules and laws and regulations and things, so they keep their family together, but they're doing it in a way where they're actually transitioning across. They're learning a different set of skills.
Absolutely.
Yeah? So actually, we're building on skills rather than telling them that they're bad.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's educative.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a range of things there. There was something else in what you were saying, and there was something about I remember growing up, and I remember a neighbour that we did something. Me and my brother, we did something. I think the ball went into their house, broke in the back garden, broke something. The neighbour came out and said, "Oh, it's all right." And I remember my parents saying to me, "It isn't all right," because, and this is, I think, culturally, what we experience here within Britain, generally speaking, what is said isn't what is always meant. So you get told it's all right, but the psychological message is, don't you dare do that again. But it isn't said. Yeah. It's a thought. Yeah. So instead of people, and as a people, I think generally, again, speaking as Black people, we'll say the sky is blue, the sky is blue. I'm not going to tell you it's green, purple or yellow when it isn't, it's blue. Yeah. We're very clear, generally speaking. So then when we have situations where there's a spoken word, but then there's a psychological message underneath it, I think that unclean communication is perhaps the ideal recipe for people to become paranoid, overly sensitive, guarded in their language and how they present. And all because the individuals we're speaking to aren't speaking to us in a clear way. They're giving us subtext. So I'm living in this subtexted world, not even sure if when someone says, "You're okay," am I really okay? Or they're just saying that for me to leave? Yeah. So I think these are those, the seeds that are planted very early on. And it's also embedded within the system. So if we talk about, think about how systems are colonialized or colonized. Yeah. Education system. We think about people in the Caribbean, India, etc. That's where the British have colonized. So the systems are there. And sometimes the people in those countries are more British than the British are, because
Absolutely.
The system is the system. Yeah. So they abide by the rule. Then they come to the UK. Then there's a big grey area because the system isn't really the system. Yeah. So I think there are all these sorts of elements begin to contribute to how parents parent and how children grow up in dual identities, British, Caribbean, African, Indian, speaking one language at home and then speaking in another language when they go to school. So a lot of our children are actually bilingual, if not multilingual. Yeah.
My question, Willis, is, I feel like I have a little preamble before I get to the question, but bear with me, I'm going to get there. In thinking about male mental health and the rate of male suicide being quite high, very worryingly high, actually, two things jump out at me: that Black men are overrepresented in the psychiatric system as inpatients, and as from your social work training, you might have the statistics better than I do. But it seems our young Black men go from "I'm okay" to "I've gone over the edge." Like there is no middle ground. There is no point at which they will either self-refer for therapy or even admit that there is a problem, that they're struggling, that they're depressed, that they're anxious, that they're stressed, that the microaggressions that they face every day is really tearing away at their self-esteem and their core. And I'm just thinking, in 12 years of practice, and I've worked in schools for 5 of those years, I've never had a young Black boy referred for therapy. I've had Black girls, yes, not one. So I wonder, where do the boys in the schools go when they're stressed, when they're struggling? Like you said, when they're having to straddle 2 worlds, dual language, dual nationality, dual culture. The rules are different at school to the rules at home. At school, I can to act out a little bit. At home, just one look, and in fact, I wouldn't even think about it in terms of expressing myself. Mm-hmm. So, do you have any thoughts as to what prevents young Black men, or even older Black men from using therapy as a middle ground between I'm okay and now I have a psychiatric disorder?
I think, okay, so I've done a large amount of work with Black male survivors of sexual abuse. Yeah, they exist. They are out there. But the statistics are really, really, really low. And when I speak to those men, quite often what they say is that they don't trust the system. So if they present in seeking help, what they think they're going to be is hospitalized.
Right.
Yeah. Or they don't believe that the criminal justice system will support them because the mythology around Black men being sexualized. So, all these things begin to converge and conflate into one. And so then I think school settings or other settings, I think the way in which we approach men generally is not always the right way. So men usually access services, they want information.
Right.
Yeah. So for a man to come into a service, they've probably gone to the website, gathered all the information they need. If it isn't there, then they'll go to another website or they'll talk to another man, usually. So that whole thing about information and information being accessible is incredibly important. So again, it needs to represent them and reflect them. So when we think about young Black men in schools, what are the images of young Black people when they're promoting the services? Where are those images? Are they reflected in the promotion of that, the tone of the way the information is presented? Is it represented in there? And so, there's something about providing a service and expecting people to fit into the service when they don't. I believe it should be the other way round. So the other way round is that there's a level of awareness across the school or the service about some of the barriers for young men, Black men, accessing services. Yeah. So what is it like to walk through that door that says counselling on it in a school? What is it like to walk through that door on a street that everybody knows it's therapy? Yeah. And your friends might be walking on the opposite side of the street. Yeah. I'm not saying that's exclusive to young Black men but there's something about where the information is, where is it located? So I've been in this field many years and, quite often there's this conversation about having services within the communities. And my thing is, most young Black men will go to the barbers.
Yeah.
Barbers can be a source of information, at least the beginning, the talking spot for young people to just know that there is a such thing as feeling stressed.
Yeah.
Feeling as though the world is against you, because maybe it is sometimes. Whatever you do, that may be part of the reality. So there's something about how services are structured and how accessible or inaccessible they are for young Black men. And there's also, depending on what location you're in and the schools are in, there is the obvious situation that's around now with drugs and other elements that are affecting our young people, young boys and young women as well. And then when we think about Black male mental health and how some men may self-prescribe You know, maybe they'll drink, they may smoke something, they may take other substances. So when we look at the mental health system, and the thresholds are so high now,
Right.
so because they're so under-resourced, literally someone, you know, they have to be on that, not even if someone's actively suicidal, the question then is, where are they placed to keep them safe?
Yeah.
So they're usually prescribed and kept safe, in brackets, in the community, within their family of origin. So what you then have is that many situations are, you have parents who are basically like psychiatric nurse roles in the community, looking after their psychologically unwell children, young men. And some of those young men are then, through the course of their illness, exposed to other factors which are incredibly risky: substances, alcohol, drugs, running drugs, just because their mental health makes them vulnerable. Not that they're drug addicts and they want to sell weed. It isn't that. It's the circle that they sometimes connect with, because there are no other safer spaces, leaves them vulnerable, exposes them to these additional layers. And then if we think about the drugs route, if you're in that circle and the people that are going to provide me with some safety are the people that are also putting me at risk, that young person then gets caught with a few wraps of weed or whatever it is. Before you know it, that route of going down the criminal justice route and being labelled as being in a gang is attributed so quickly to young black men now. And we just look at, you know, young black men that I've worked with, and they talk about being stopped and searched. So they're criminalised, they feel criminalised. And then when we say to them, oh, you know, the police are there to keep you safe, etc., it's difficult to tally that with what they see.
Yeah.
So again, the information needs to shift and change so that, it needs to shift and change. I could go on about this because it's so deep and close to my heart, and it's so interconnected with so many different layers. And we think about poverty, deprivation, the closing down of services that should have been there. Young people come in, they access services. The services are commissioned for 6 sessions.
Yeah.
So you better get better in the 6 sessions or else. They go to the GP, they're on the waiting list, you know, and so it goes on. It goes on. And I have experience of working with young people who are privileged because their parents are in very good jobs. Young black people their parents are in good jobs. They can access private healthcare, etc. But those are the few.
Yeah.
They're the few. So there are many of those young people who are walking around probably just incredibly stressed. Yeah. So I think it's about how information is presented and how accessible it is to young people, and how do they see them in it. I'll give an example. The young person I worked with, and in our work, we used grime music, and we deconstructed the music. What did that mean about their lives? What was in the music which was reflecting where they were coming from and where they thought they were going to? Yeah. So there's something about really reaching in, and I've had to learn to listen to different genres of music to connect to young people on different levels. So it's about how we do that. And men, adult males, you know, this is perhaps for another one of your podcasts, but there's something there about some adult males who have grown up in incredibly violent households.
Yeah.
So they are traumatized men. And when they become scared, they reenact their trauma and come from a child position. So they're frightened, but what they do outwardly is aggressive and violent and dangerous. So that child who was scared can't necessarily see what's going in front of them, lashes out, you're into a domestic violence situation or something else. Yeah. So again, it's that stuff about when someone looks at me and see a big grown black man, 6 foot, XYZ, whatever, I have had a past. I have had experiences which may well have been traumatizing. So we've got to see past what's in front of us and recognize at one point, all of us were children. All of us were vulnerable. And that's what we need to speak to when we're talking to the adult males that are in front of us. They've had a past. Be open to that. Be willing to hear it and name it.
That is awesome as a response. Thank you. Certainly, I am more aware, I think, of some of the barriers that prevent our young men accessing help. I'm thinking of Top Boy, the series, and this is Sarah's favorite thing, and she got me into it. But I could see how young it starts. Now, any character in Top Boy, I can't imagine them knocking on a therapist's door as a solution to what's going on in their lives, to the poverty, to the stress, to the homelessness. They wouldn't. They just wouldn't come to therapy. So I'm going to stop here, but I would like to think about how we can reach them, because we're 4 Black professionals here on this podcast tonight. And like I said, I have not worked with any male at all. And that's quite shocking. But I'm going to pause here because I know Sarah wanted to jump back in.
No, just quickly, Willis, this is fascinating. I have worked with a few young Black boys, and they present, interestingly enough, they always come to me laughing at themselves, which is quite bizarre. So they'll present to me, they're always trying to joke around. So we need to cut that straight away and just get to it. They always come laughing. So they're kind of a bit, I'm not sure. They want to talk, but they're laughing at themselves. And they struggle to come back. They do come back and see me, but they struggle with that as well. So I might see them kind of around the school, and they'll look at me, and then I'll come and knock on the door. But often when no one can see them. But yeah, Willis, I just wanted to ask you, when it comes to adult men, so not the boys anymore, what is your advice about an adult man, not with severe psychiatric disorders or mental health difficulties at present, but maybe it's all men, when a man goes very quiet, what's the best tactics? And this can go with people that have mental ill health or people that don't have mental ill health at present. What do you think? What's the best thing to do? Leave the person alone, get on with everything, or kind of be curious? What do you think?
I think the main thing to say is to let that person know that you're there. I see you. I mean, it's as basic as that. I've noticed that you might say, it might be something like, I noticed you've been quiet recently. It might be hard to talk about, but no, say, I'm here. When you're ready, right. I'm here. So what you do is you begin to open doors instead of picking people up and trying to put them on chairs, and fix them. Because men, I think generally, if men know that we as therapists are listening, they will tune into that. So there's something about, am I deserving of, to be heard? And it may be really odd to sit in a room with someone and begin to just talk about feelings. So quite often what I experience is men will talk about, they will think about things, not feel things. So then in that situation, not that men are not capable of feeling, that isn't it? But that is their primary functioning, way of functioning, dealing with things. This is a problem, gotta solve it.
That's my dad.
Yeah. And so then what we're aiming to do is, as a therapist, we have to do some of that feeling and imagining. So again, as I was talking earlier about, we were all children at one point, we have to go into that position of almost trying to see the world through the eyes of that adult male in front of us. What does this world look like? What is it like for you to sit in this room with me, another man, know that you want to cry, but actually you're putting on the face, the persona, and holding it down, keeping it, because you don't know if when you leave, you're going to be in tears walking down the street because of what you're dealing with is so deep. Yeah. So for me, in those situations, I will say to men, it's okay to cry, and don't sort of look. And I go, if you've got nowhere else in your house that's private, usually you go to the toilet by yourself. So the loo is your private space. Yeah. Shut the door, put on music if you want to do that. get in touch with some emotion. Sometimes it's as basic as that, because there are no safe spaces. I'll often say to men, to use the car as a place where they can scream or shout and sing or whatever it is, because someone else looking in is probably think they're singing to the radio, but they could be having a real outpouring of emotion in that safe space. But I think ultimately it's that thing about opening doors and not expecting men to come and fit into this traditional therapeutic mold of knocking on the door, sitting in the room, the two chairs, the tissues, the this, the that, the other. Sometimes when a lot of work I've done with men has been shoulder to shoulder work. So it's that walking, it's sitting beside them and talking about things. And the analogy would be, if you've got two men sat together at a sports event, they're probably going to talk really deep stuff, but they're not looking at each other.
Yeah,
they're looking in front, but they're talking really deeply. And what you can do, if say you're working with, say it's an adult, and it's safe to do it, you may think about how your chairs are positioned in the room. And maybe there's something, you may be working on a piece of paper, you're drawing, writing things down. So the thinking part of the brain experience is able to deliver the words on the paper, but you're also connecting in with the feeling as well. So the body's doing one thing and we're connecting on the emotional level too. No?
Really interesting. Do you think it's mainly a man thing in your experience, Willis? Do you think I've only noticed really it's men that will go quiet. Mainly women we might go quiet and think, but then we tend to start talking or making some kind of movements towards how we're feeling. I see it in men a lot.
I think men
close up.
So if in my experience, if I'm with a man and he closes up, this is that thing about mindfulness or mind-mindedness, where, as I said, in child development, it would be mentalization. So the they've gone quiet, I'm sat with them. As I said, I'm trying to think, if I was sat in your seat, what am I thinking? What do I imagine you're going through? The challenge for me as a therapist is to name that and to say it out loud. And I say it as not as a concrete statement, but it's something like, I wonder if, I've got a hunch, how might it be if? So it's an invitation to correct or confirm. But either way, it's an invitation to move on. And it's also saying, I can imagine what you're going through. And I think that is possible female to male, male to male. That isn't a gender thing. I think it's a relational thing. And then there are those men that come in and they're incredibly chatty. Talk. Sometimes the really talkative people they keep talking to get through the session, so we don't go that bit deeper. So we have to learn to interrupt politely but effectively. We interrupt, acknowledge, and we ask that deeper question. So again, it's, if you weren't speaking, I wonder what you'd be feeling. Yeah? Or what's the feeling behind that smile? If you weren't smiling, what would you be doing? Yeah? And I don't know if you remember, it's a really old Charlie Chaplin song, Smile Though Your Heart Is Aching. Yeah? That's what I think of when I see people smiling a lot in sessions. So I know the other side of that is possibly sadness, despair, loneliness, grief, despondency, whatever it is, but it isn't the smile. No?
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Willis. That's really, going to be lots of food for thought there. Thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, I love the passion that you have for the work that you do. I love when you talked about, listening to grime and really trying to unpick it, because, there are messages in there, aren't there? And you're trying to relate to the young person that you're working with. And if that's what they're doing, that's what they're into. Absolutely. You want to, kind of meet them, like I say, where they are. Yeah. You mentioned so many things in there that were just so interesting to me. But I was also thinking about, even in relationships, I was thinking about listeners who might be in a relationship with somebody, for a woman might be in a relationship with a man, or it could be a same-sex relationship, where a man is experiencing mental health difficulties. And something you mentioned was talking and listening, actually. That's what it was. You said to listen. So important, isn't it? And not assuming that we can fix things. Because sometimes we want to go in, want to sort it, fix it, get it done, next, move on. And sometimes maybe people just need to be heard, and they really need not for you to respond. You're not listening so that you can respond. You're just listening so that you can get a better understanding. And I think that's such an important point. I was just thinking about, how we can perhaps address the stigma that is attached to mental health, particularly in our community. I was thinking of a conversation I had with a man not too long ago, and he was saying the thing is, women want us to be strong. Actually, when we do break down, it's really hard for them, and they don't really know what to do, because we are usually quite strong, stereotypically, I know, but they want to keep things going, and they want to just keep things moving and not have any difficulties. And when they do, I think they're afraid that, well, this particular person was saying to me that actually he was afraid to not be able to cope, because I guess in that relationship, he didn't feel as if he had a safe enough space that he could just, fall to pieces, if for want of a better phrase. So I suppose what I'm thinking of for myself as a woman, I would like to be able to create a safe space in my own life, in my family, where if a man, indeed a woman, but we're talking about men's mental health today, was feeling vulnerable, or they needed to, that safe space, that I could create that. And it made me think, oh my goodness, I wonder if in my relationships I have done that. And it's making me be quite reflective, to be fair. So yeah, you just raised so many interesting points there that's what it made me think about me and how I can help this movement. What can I change about myself that then creates a safer space for men around me, my family, my relationships, to be open, to be honest, to be able to be themselves, where I don't judge, where I'm not criticizing, where I'm not, thinking that they're weak, where I'm not, because, I imagine I'm probably guilty, even though, I'm a mental health practitioner. I wonder how much of that I actually take on board in my own personal life. So it's just made me quite reflective.
Yeah. And I think listening is key. It is that. And, sometimes I think, so, okay, there's a couple of things. So listening is key. Why is that key? Listening is key because sometimes a situation cannot be solved. It just can't be solved. It might be a money issue. Unless you've got a big money tree in your back garden, you can't solve it. But what you can do is say, do you know what? Look here, I hear it's hard, it's difficult. And this is what I can do. Or you ask the person, what do you want? What do you think would be helpful for you now? Yeah? Hand some of that power back. You said something earlier there as well about a man breaking down and showing tears and emotion. Often some of my work in palliative care has been where, and in palliative care in terms of children dying, has been where fathers have held on and been the rock, and they're crumbling on the inside, absolutely crumbling. And so that element there is about, my mom would often say to me, he who feels it knows it.
Yeah, that's right.
Pain is just pain. It's pain. Mm. We can't take it away, but I can say to you, I'm not going to leave you alone in it. Mm. And that may be as far as we can go for a period of time. The other thing is about having conversations about stress, anxiety, depression, as normal, regular, everyday conversations, in the same way we talk about the designer jeans and the trainers and the music, it's on that kind of level. So we destigmatize the language within our own network, so that when it does come up, and everyone's affected by mental health difficulties at one point in their life or another, that we allow the space for the conversation to take place. Not all conversations end up in medication, because people find other ways of supporting themselves, be it faith, diet, exercise, whatever it is. But it's about having the conversation and not let it ruminate, because that's where illness lies, I believe, that the ruminations, the rounds and around. You said something else, and I'm jumping around because there's something you said earlier, and I was thinking, in my training, we did lots of work around fairy tales, Grimm's, the Grimm fairy tales, and how they were used analytically with clients. And then I remember talking to Pete, we all culturally, no matter where we're from in the world, we have stories that are culturally appropriate to us. So Anansi Spider is one. Yeah. They'll have others. And they're all stories about hope, their lessons and things like that. So I use those, and when I look at that, that's why I then got to the grime and music, because music tells stories. The authors of the music are telling stories, yeah? And that's all that it is, just another way of telling stories. So what we aim to do is enable people to tell their story in a way that is appropriate for them. So if it's like they can't put it into words now, but there's a song that can do it, I'll listen to the song. Yeah. Listen to it together. Yeah. If there's an artist, or as in painting artist, or a movie, sometimes the stories are in those places, but people can't articulate it well enough, they think. Yeah.
I just jump in quickly and say that's a brilliant point. I want to use that, Willis, as one of my teenagers that I work with at school. That is fab. I've thought about music before, and I often ask people what they're listening to at the moment, and we talk about it. But actually listening to it together, I think that would be a really, really good one. So thanks for that.
So my way in is saying, if there was what would be the soundtrack or the playlist for your life?
Yes.
I'll tell you.
Yeah, I'm loving it. Loving it. I'm coming to you for therapy, Willis. For me, not the young people.
He's a brilliant supervisor. I can recommend him highly.
Because the thing is, I listen to music a lot as well. Like if I'm heartbroken, I get all songs that are telling my story. I get the Mary J. Blige out, and I'm singing at the top of my lungs because she's speaking to me, or she's telling my story. So I completely 100% get what you're saying. Yeah, I too am going to steal that. I'm going to magpie that, and I'm going to use that.
Same here. I go for my Buja Banton is not an easy road, or Poor People Fed Up, There is Hammer, and all the tunes that tell the story of our collective lives.
Absolutely, yeah.
I use Willis. I'm aware we've taken about 15 minutes more time than you offered, so I'm gonna wrap up.
Okay.
I'd like a final word from you on, specifically for those listeners who have sons and husbands and brothers and uncles and cousins who they know are struggling but have not been able to reach. What can they be looking out for in terms of, is this okay and they'll be all right with prayer and music, or now it's time to reach for the professionals? Like I said, I'm really mindful of that big gap between I'm okay 1 minute and next minute I'm in a psych unit for 6 months. What could they be looking out for? We're professionals, we know. But what could our listeners be looking out for?
Okay, so some of the key things to look out for will be things such as changing appetite. So sometimes we talk about people not eating. Sometimes people overeat as well when they're not well. So that's an emotional eating situation. Then there's insomnia. So some people don't sleep. And then you get the other, which is hypersomnia. They sleep too much. So all of these things are about disconnecting or blocking things. Sometimes there are moments when individuals will talk about having the thoughts are fragmented. So someone can be talking to you and they seem to be jumping around from one topic to another, and recalling historical events with real clarity and detail. So for me, that's someone who's perhaps ruminating over thoughts and they're preoccupied with these thoughts. And also the lack of interest in their usual day-to-day activities, even their appearance. that lack of interest in how they look, how, not washing, those sorts of things. Not everyone who is experiencing mental health difficulties is able to express themselves and say, I'm not feeling okay, because they've shut down. So then sometimes we have to, as I was saying earlier, imagine. We've known them in other times when they've been buoyant and whatnot. So my thing would be, okay, I'm looking at you now. 6 months ago, what was going on? I might even scroll through my phone and look at a couple of your messages, the jokes we had, and suddenly it stopped. And from there on, there's been nothing else. So in a way, we take the time to reflect on how the person was, to then how they are now, and what we imagine might be coming. Because we've known them, we have a sense of what may come. The big step quite often is seeking that support from a mental health professional, which is usually the GP is the first point of call. And the GP is really important. So if the person you're caring about isn't able to go to the GP, and say it's a partner or a child, then you go to your GP, you tell your GP, this is what I'm concerned about with this person. If they're in the same practice, the GP can call them and invite them in to have a chat. Yeah? And what we don't want to do is be doing things behind the person's back. So we then let them know, that I was concerned about you and I've spoken to the GP about my concerns. They want to hear your side. They want to hear what's going on for you. Yeah? And also remembering, for some people, mental health difficulty, it isn't always psychiatric. It can be a health problem. They might have a urinary tract infection. They might have a thyroid issue. There might be a vitamin deficiency. So talking to the doctor is really, really important to rule out any of those other underlying health concerns that may be there. Yeah. And I guess for those that are caring for others, look after yourself as well. It's, it's almost like if you can look after you and keep you okay, then you're able to look after those that you care about more effectively. So you need the time out, sleep, eating, and having spaces where you can vent. Quite often people talk about these quiet spaces. I'm looking forward to a screaming space where I can cuss and F and blind and just feel as though I've released it and let it go. Yeah? So that is part of good mental health too, the letting go of it. And I'll go back to music. And there's a song that I'd often go to and I'm feeling really on the edge of it. And it's Khalees, I Hate You So Much Right Now.
Oh, yeah. I love Khalees.
Headphones, noise cancelling, full volume. Nobody knows what's going on. Yeah. But I've got this whole letting go thing going on. Then the other side of that is my classical music, Chopin, lullaby. Nice. I'm in a good place. Yeah. Right. So it's a whole range of things. So the carer also needs to be cared for as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Willis, for joining us tonight. I literally have nothing else to add except to say thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insight. Ladies, any final words?
Thank you. I just want to say thank you again, Willis. It's been a pleasure and it's given us, I think all of us as professionals, a really good understanding more about male mental health and kind of the way men's brains work a little bit more. So thank you.
Right.
I just wanted to echo that really and just say it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. I will definitely be using some of the practices that you talked about tonight. And yeah, I just hope that we've sort of opened up more dialogue really to talk about mental health, particularly men's mental health, so important. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome. You're welcome. Absolute pleasure. Keep talking, keep talking, keep talking.
We will. Thank you so much. So that's it for this week's episode. As usual, send us your thoughts, your feedback, your responses to tonight's episode at beautifullymelanatedpodcast@gmail.com, Instagram, at Beautifully Melanated Podcast. I keep forgetting that one. If you know us personally, drop us a message. We'd love to hear from you. And tune in next time, because this is a series. So we spoke to a professional tonight. Our next episode, we hope to have someone on who has experienced poor mental health and how they managed it. And then following that, we hope to have an organization on that works with particularly young men who are at risk of suicide. So, yeah, thanks for listening. Have a good night. Stay blessed.
We are beautifully.